Welcome back to Crit and Crit. I'm Axion.
I'm Scint.
We are continuing through the ruins of La-Mulana as we discuss 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne.
And we've got a big one today.
So how big are we talking?
Most of the world.
Almost as big as the British Empire once was.
Yeah, about that. So, we kind of talked a bit before about, Nemo's whole thing is, we live in a society, and I don't want to be part of the society. I'm going to go live in my underwater submarine and do whatever I want and not be beholden to any country. Well, a major theme...
I'll build my own world with blackjack and hookers. Forget the world.
But, yeah, so, this is largely because one of the major themes of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, though not really explicitly drawn attention to by Professor I Love Me Some Fish Aronnax, is imperialism. It's constantly present, if only through Nemo's, predilections and commentary. So, first step is to define imperialism, and Axiom, what do you think of with that?
Honestly, the British Empire is probably one of the biggest examples thereof. Imperialism is usually defined as the creation, spread, and maintaining of a single cultural system of power through conquest and domination. And to a lesser extent, the eradication of alternate... Well, no, not to a lesser extent. In addition, the eradication of alternate perceptions and cultures, and the assimilation, willing or otherwise, of the people of those cultures into the monoculture of the Empire.
Okay, a little more detail than I was going with it. I was going with the simple definition, which is the policy of extending a nation's power and or influence, they kind of go hand in hand, through diplomacy or military force. So whether it's just setting up, unfair trade practices that are very clearly beneficial to one side more than the other, or outright colonization through conquest, it's still, as you said, the influence of one country/culture at the exclusion of others. And not to wade too deeply into the quagmire of this, but the world is still very much feeling the effects of that to this day.
Nope, we're not going that way.
Oh, you don't like it there?
Not here to see David Bowie today.
And as we mentioned, the British Empire is going to be the biggest example here, and it's honestly kind of the most relevant to 20,000 Leagues, because, well, if there is an empire that Nemo is fleeing in the mid-19th century, odds are good that he's from a British-controlled nation at some point, and as we've mentioned, the mysterious island, despite the fact that its continuity is a little bit off, does confirm that he is in fact Indian. So yes, it is the British Empire he is not too pleased with. Which doesn't rule out most countries, because let's see, that would also be, Yakko, get in here. But yeah, the British Empire has a lot of sway at this point in history. I think this is possibly the Empire's height. So, yeah. Professor Aronnax would not be unfamiliar with this either, being French, and everything I have seen throughout history is that if there's an excuse to fight each other, the French and British will take it. And also, this is not too far off of the Napoleonic era, where France did some imperialism of their own. And, again, still had colonies up through, at the very least, the 60s, Vietnam, which we're not getting into right now. But, yeah, imperialism doesn't really get as much focus in period pieces like written contemporarily to the events, because obviously the main writers of the time would have been from the conquering country, and therefore not seeing anything off about it, and would just mention, oh yes, it's from the colonies, and and not go into much detail about the unfortunate realities of colonization. The marginalized voices have only, in more recent years, been getting more of a voice to really go into, here's the extent of what has happened. And then you have Nemo, who took a completely different path, which is to say, screw you, I have the resources to get out of here, so I'm just not going to play. I'm not going to protest either, I'm just not going to play. But he will, as we see, absolutely sink ships over it.
Speaking of sinking ships, let's fight Sakit.
This is going to go well.
I just bought a bunch of shurikens. I should be fine.
Sakit sucks.
He does.
But, yeah. Imperialism, throughout much of history, and very explicitly in Nemo's ideology, is inextricably linked to the idea of oppression. And that is the country that Nemo addresses himself to. Like, he is a part of the nation of all oppressed peoples in need, which is why when they are off the coast of India, he's willing to rescue the Pearl Diver. Because, well, that guy is clearly not doing anything to hurt people, and he is clearly doing something very dangerous for not a whole lot of pay. He is one of the oppressed masses that, needs a voice for him, so I am happy to save him, even though I have cut off all contact with all nations of the world.
He is not my enemy, he is not a danger to me, and he is not a person of power who would be advantaged by my absence. He is a suffering person who deserves to be treated with respect. And since the world will not do it, Nemo will.
Which is a little bit ironic when you consider how he reacted to the tribe on that one island that they landed on to give the prisoners a chance to stretch their legs and get some meat.
Well, unfortunately, a product of its time it still is, and thus even the charity of the champion of the underclass has its historical limits in some cases. It's an unfortunate fact that even in a case like this, a character clearly meant to be sympathetic to the underclasses of the world is still written in a way that is not willing to give that respect to people that the author does not see as equal. Ah, crud. Ah, crud. This is going to be a multiple tries.
Like I said, Sakit sucks.
I really wish I'd found the knife. That would make this much easier.
Yeah, I don't remember where the knife is.
I don't either. Back off, dude.
Oh, I think it's in the Temple of the Sun.
Ah, right.
Yeah, oddly enough, though it does kind of, as far as I'm concerned, undermine his point about the poor and oppressed and, people should not abuse their power. It is consistent with his idea of, well, they attacked my ship and I'm just defending it. Even though, it was very clear that they could do absolutely nothing to actually be a threat to the Nautilus.
Yep.
They're going after a submarine with spears. So what he does is, unleash an electric force field to shock them away from the boat. Seems a little bit, excessive, but I don't know.
At least his music is awesome.
Oh Oh yeah, like, what music in this game is it?
Twin Labyrinths.
I actually kind of like the Twin Labyrinth music.
Okay, fair point.
But yeah, it's one of those things where you can absolutely have a character who has a very good point. Like, in historical hindsight, it's very obvious to see that imperialism has caused a lot of international harm that persists to this day. The division of the Middle East after World War I bears special mention, and I don't really want to get into it, but it didn't go so good is probably a good way to say it.
And that is a rabbit hole we could spend hours on. But we're not going to, because that's not what this book is about.
Similarly, dividing up the borders in sub-Saharan Africa was also done by Europeans who had never actually been there, and drawing the borders did a lot to, undermine water access and tribal traditional lands, which are still being contested in many places to this day, quite violently. So, yeah. You come into a place you don't know much about, you completely whitewash over the culture, and then when you finally can't afford to stay there anymore, you just leave the mess to be cleaned up by whatever is able to be cleaned up. At the time that the book was published, it was kind of a radical idea to be, so vocally against this sort of thing, I would imagine. Because, well, probably less so for a Frenchman to tacitly criticize the British Empire, though he wasn't really criticizing any empire because he didn't explicitly in 22nd League state what empire Nemo was particularly cheesed at.
One could make assumptions, but those are just assumptions, historically valid as they may be.
Yep. And you can almost say that in a sense that Nemo is making his own little empire, because, there's the South Pole incident. He wanted to be there first before any of the other nations of the world had gotten there, and stuck his claim on it. He said it was safe land because no man had ever set foot there, and, now he has claimed it, and what is imperialism if not going to a place and claiming it for whatever reason, be it access to resources to further the ideals of mercantilism and capitalism, or just, an ego trip. It's amazing how often those two coincide. Amazing and depressing, but yeah.
I was going to say working as intended. Ow. Oh, awesome! I got his mask off.
Rocket fists!
Ah! I thought I dodged it.
Welp. You want to go look for the knife?
Yeah. I need to remember how to get to the temple. Is it from here?
Guidance gate, I believe.
Anyway, you were saying.
I don't remember. The last thing I remember saying is rocket fist.
Nope, up this way. Good grief. I hate that door. So we have... Let's go with the assumption from Mysterious Island that Nemo is Indian. His behavior is not incredibly out of place. He would hardly be the first person in British-controlled India to have violently rebelled against the control of the Empire. And while the peaceful revolution of Gandhi is more well known, unless you're playing Civilization.
Gandhian civilization is special.
There were no shortage of violent conflicts against British imperial control in the time of British-controlled India. This was far from abnormal. The only thing that's really unusual about it, Nemo, is all the sci-fi elements of his story. Of the Nautilus and of all of its capabilities. And then the fantastical nature of Nemo's own adventures and his capability for causing mayhem for the surface world. Everything else about what happens in the book with regards to the British Empire, again, presuming that our deduction of the events of the latter portion of the book are accurate, is really only different from the rest of that in scope. Because it's been cranked up for a fictional story. Otherwise, there's nothing Nemo did that doesn't seem to be working.
Yeah, I think you need the knife for that.
That's annoying.
Wait, go back up. Walk to your right.
There it is. Oh, it's just a map. So yeah, taking that into account, we fall into the same situation that we had last episode, where it comes down to a moral judgment on how you feel about vigilantism and... Ah, yes, I need to do this nonsense. Without that happening. Keep getting interrupted by the game. You have to decide how you feel about vigilantism and the willingness to take violent, hostile action against an oppressing power, even to the point of breaking laws and harming innocents in the service of that power. And that's going to be a decision that each individual is going to have to make on their own for their own reasons. But Nemo has clearly made his decision on that regard. Right, I can't do any of this yet.
Oh well. But you got the knife.
Yep.
And yeah, I just find it interesting that, like, at no point in the story does the professor really make an attempt to change Nemo's mind about, like, anything. He's just there to tell us that Nemo exists and to look at fish. Very much about the fish. So, yeah. The book can point Nemo sympathetically or unsympathetically, depending on how you wish to read it, but at no point does the professor actually say he likes or does not like the idea. Mostly he's just like, cool, fish.
And there's a few different ways you could read that. You could read that as Verne just wanting to keep perspective on Nemo from the characters in the story as neutral as possible.
Well, not really, because Ned absolutely hates Nemo because you can't do this.
Okay, from the perspective character.
Well, politics-wise, he keeps it neutral, but the professor very much seems to admire Nemo in basically all scientific respects.
Sure, but those are a different question.
Something else to kind of raise here that might not make a lot of sense, but I'm going with it anyway, is the careful distribution of knowledge a form of imperialism. Like, Nemo clearly has a wealth of very interesting and helpful scientific information at his disposal. But since he has cut off all contact with the surface, never again to return, that knowledge is essentially lost to a lot of people who could greatly improve their lives from it. Like, there are lots of, in the 19th century, people who, make their living from the sea, still to this day, though to a lesser extent. Knowing, like, where certain schools of fish are, that you can, get to one sea from another through this tunnel that Nemo discovered, and all these things can be very, very useful for people on the surface, and honestly probably help ease the lives of some of the oppressed that Nemo claims to champion. But he will never give them that information. Is that a form of, imperial control in some way?
I'd not say that it's a form of imperial control because it doesn't have the societal power that an actual imperial would have, but it is a form of privilege.
Yep, and I would say that in the other direction, yes, it would be. So Nemo can't be an imperial power because he's not an empire of himself, but control of information and making sure only the right people get the information is absolutely something empires do.
I am having a bad day with Sakit.
You don't have to fight Sakit now.
I can't hurt him with the knife. This was a complete waste of time!
It was a giant waste of time.
Boo. Fine, just kill me.
And with that, it's probably a good place to end off for this one. We'll do something else next time.
See ya.